So you came cowering to my chambers? I'm flattered, Sergeant. But even I cannot command natural phenomena to cease.
Lord Enver Gortash is one of the many villains from the game Baldurs Gate 3. He is played by the great Jason Isaacs. He is described as a young and handsome man with an easy smile, only to look more like a washed up rock star. Above all, he is a fascinating character. At first glance, your stereotypical Machiavellian villain, except he's not quite. I'm a big fan of Gortash. He's awful, he's horrible, he's not a particularly challenging boss fight, but he is so very intriguing. What's going on in his head? Well, I am a therapist and that's what we're going to discuss today, the psychology of Enver Gortash. Quick disclaimers before we begin, we will be talking as though he is a real person. People always comment about this when I make analysis videos on fictional characters. I am aware they are fictional, but that's hardly the point. These videos are an exercise in empathy and human understanding. It would be horrifically unethical and exposing to talk about real people in this way, but we can learn a lot from fiction and we are less constrained there, which is point 2. There's a lot we don't know about Gortash. We don't get the story from his perspective, we don't have all the information made clear, and so because he's fictional I am more free to speculate this video in certain areas where I think is appropriate, but obviously that's not what you would do with real people. You would talk to real people you were analysing, you would ask them questions, you would see what they think, not jump to conclusions like we're going to do in this video. And thirdly, my girlfriend and I have played Baldurs Gate 3, I think 3 times, but I don't have any footage because my PC can barely handle to run the game itself. We tried in the past, but if I load up OBS to screen record as well, the whole thing just crashes. I'm a therapist, not a professional gamer. As such, when we do need footage from the game to show quotes, I will be using clips I found from other YouTubers that I will credit in the corner of the shots. Especially this hero who uploaded an entire compilation of all of Gortash's scenes. But if any of the clips have strange mods in their playthroughs or whatever, don't come knocking at my door. So, Enver Gortash, where to begin? Yeah, let's just kick this off with a quick summary of his character for anyone who's unfamiliar or hazy. Enver Gortash is a scheming, wily type of politician, I suppose we could call him, who began his career as a black market weapons dealer in the city of Baldurs Gate, employing a young Karlach as his bodyguard and slowly expanding his business into other areas. We don't know what exactly, I think just as much as possible. I can imagine there's mercenary work involved due to his competition with the Zhentarim and the fact he would later become the city's military advisor. He also supplanted the infamous Knights of the Shields gang, if you can call them that, which is no mean feat when it was run by a mind flayer, although said mind flayer did get captured. But either way, he expanded his operations in all directions he could, and then managed to worm his way up into the more socially acceptable sphere of city politics, becoming said military advisor for the elites and beginning to grow in influence at court. It's not exactly clear how he did this, but we do have 2 tidbits on the subject that I might as well share now. One is that a wealthy and influential figure named Lady Janeth has a journal that documents a fling with Gortash when he was a young man, in which she even gave him a diamond ring as a gift that was worth more than her entire estate. This is a hint both on where he got a lot of his initial gold and how he might have got his foot in the door with the city's elite, but also I think we could probably assume he's done similar things with other characters to get certain political advantages too. And secondly, if you talk with a lot of the random nobility dotted around the hall after his coronation in the game, there is a general sense from the public there that whilst he might be a bit of a rough figure, not the polished, respectable man you'd expect to brush shoulders with this nobility, he is a man who gets things done. A lot of people saying that kind of thing. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any clips online for this dialogue, but obviously these are people saying that at the height of Gortash's career at a particularly turbulent time, but it's likely this might have been a general opinion for a while. That yes, the nobility might not want to give a political platform to a lower class black market arms dealer, however Lady Janeth vouches for him and he does seem to get things done. He does seem to have significant finances and military shrewdness, and Faerun is a dangerous place. Gortash at some point became the chosen for the god Bane, who is effectively the god of tyranny, which tells you a lot about Gortash's ambitions. He began scheming alongside the figure known as the Dark Urge on how to not just gain total control of Baldurs Gate, but all of Faerun, which is the main villainous plot of this game. And I should summarise that. How do you summarise the villain's plot in this game simply? Make up a fake religion called the Absolute. Get an old magical relic called the Crown of Karsus that holds incredibly powerful magic that you can use to enslave an Elder Brain. An Elder Brain being an illithid creature who effectively mind controls its spawn into doing what it wants. So now you just stick a load of the Elder Brain's mind flayer tadpoles into people's brains so that the Elder Brain can then control them. Unfortunately for Gortash, there's never going to be enough tadpoles to infiltrate every citizen, which is where the fake religion comes in. You stick the tadpoles into powerful or influential people and tell them this voice of the Elder Brain they now hear in their heads is actually the voice of this divine god, the Absolute, and that the reason they can hear it is because they are true souls, those rare few chosen by the Absolute to carry its message. So basically you turn them into fervent, zealous supporters of a fictitious religion who will then start recruiting swathes of people to follow their call. You use the Crown of Karsus to tell the Elder Brain what to do, the Elder Brain tells the true souls what to do, the true souls tell everyone else like it's a commandment from God. Power. And that's only one half of it. Gortash allies with this assassin named the Dark Urge, and then Orin, to murder a bunch of people in Baldurs Gate and spread a lot of panic. Also to ally with an old general named Keferic Thorm, who uses all of this mind control stuff to raise up an army that threatens to invade Baldurs Gate. It's kind of a fake threat. Total panic in the city. Gortash then stands up as a man with a plan and the resources to defend the city. He knows how to defeat this army, and he will do so provided they give him the political power and the title of Archduke Gortash to effectively do what he wants. He will be the saviour to defend the city from a threat of his own creation. It's very convoluted, and that's even with me simplifying it down quite a lot there, but it tells us how ruthless, manipulative, calculating Gortash is. It's also a very long-term plan. It's not an impulsive one, you know? It tells us Gortash is willing to work with others in order to achieve his ambition. He allied with Keferic and Orin, who were chosen of two other not very nice gods of death, Merkel and Baal, together known as the Dead-Free gods. Historically, Bane, Merkel and Baal have always been opposed, but Gortash seeks to unite the three for the sake of a common aim. That's interesting, and this is all interesting background, but there's not really much substance to what we're saying yet. So let's journey back into Gortash's childhood. Lord Enver Gortash did not grow up a lord, or a Gortash. That was the title and the surname he later adopted, but his life began as Enver Flim, the son of two cobblers in the lower city of Baldurs Gate. Now, Gortash never says anything about his childhood or his parents, but we do discover from the general lore that his parents sold a young Gortash, I'm still going to call him Gortash just for consistency, sold him to a warlock. His parents were up to their eyeballs in debt, then a warlock conveniently came along, offering to give them the kind of golds that might clear their debts in exchange for their son. Now, this is immediately interesting. Not only because you later learn if you visit the lair of the devil Raphael in this game, that is where Gortash was raised, meaning this so-called warlock who bought him was actually Raphael, or potentially Raphael's warlock assistant Karlach buying him on Raphael's behalf, but yes, they sold their only son to a devil for gold. It's doubly interesting though that they themselves don't seem to know it's Raphael. They only mention a warlock. No name either, just some warlock.
Then a warlock offered us a pretty penny for Enver's service.
I'm highlighting this because the argument set out if you use Detect Thoughts to speak to Gortash's mother, she argues they had no choice but to sell their son, that they needed the gold to survive, that it was best for all of them. However, even in the unlikely case that she genuinely believes that to be true, that it was best for all of them, wouldn't you try to garner some information on where your son is going, who is taking him, not just a warlock? You would want a name, wouldn't you, in case you ever need to trace them, or just have some idea of where your son would be living, what he'd be doing. I mean, Karlach or Raphael could have then just lied and made up some fanciful story about a nice home Gortash is going to, but that is never mentioned, implying that they never asked. They didn't want to know where their son was going, and they certainly didn't want to contact him again. I think that suggests both that they expected they were selling him away to a life of torment to some degree, but that they wanted to feign ignorance on exactly what that was, and also just that they were more than happy to say a permanent goodbye to a young Enver Flim. That's very cold. No doubt this felt like an incredibly cold, heartless, and profit-driven decision by his parents to just completely drop him as soon as it became profitable, which we know is exactly what Gortash would later do to Karlach, and in a way planned to do to his allies Orin and Keferic, and was probably just in general one core aspect of his whole political strategy. Not all of it, but on some degree, use people while they are useful and just discard them at the drop of a hat the very second it is more profitable to do that than it is to keep them around. That's what Gortash experienced as a child, and people often talk about cycles of abuse like it's some mythic thing you're forever doomed to. In Karlach's words,
"When you get f***ed up, you f*** up right back."
And it's not something you're doomed to, no. I've made many videos where we discuss people who were able to grow beyond what they experienced, even if it's very complex and difficult. But the thing is, people rarely talk about why it happens. Why do cycles repeat at times? For which there are obviously a lot of different answers, but one of them that's relevant to this story is that humans aren't born with a clear understanding of how relationships work and how to interact with other people. You learn that from how people interact with you when you're young and how that relationship feels. Your brain is most malleable and most busy developing its connections at a young age, so the experiences then have the most imprint. If you grow up experiencing people who treat relationships as something purely transactional, and you feel treated like something purely transactional, then it does become very difficult to learn a different way of connecting to others. This is what's familiar, and then to an extent what feels the most safe, even if it might not be really. And second, arguably, you repeat a cycle of abuse as a flawed and warped means to try and process it. A failed means, I should add as well. You act it out in another setting with another person in order to try and make sense of what happened to you. And in many ways, this is kind of the core idea of play therapy. A child uses dolls and toys to just play out a lot of their trauma, or a lot of whatever's going on in their brain that they're trying to make sense of. Often they do this subconsciously and totally unprompted because it's such a key part of what play already is. A child who may have lost a parent in a car crash might gravitate towards playing games with the toy cars, for example, games where he smashes the cars into each other over and over and over, and that itself might not be processing. You might get stuck there. But as a therapist, you can then use that space to subtly start wondering about the play, and to open up space to try and reflect on it or think about it. And in that regard, there is some argument to say if an older Gortash later sells his closest companion Karlach to the archdevil Zariel, where she then spends the next 10 years forced to serve as a killing machine, that on some level this is an attempt of Gortash to process his own experiences. Only here it's not successful. It's not safely done through the fiction of play. There's little attempts to reflect on it. It's not opening a contained space to explore things. It's letting your trauma spill out into your wider world and relationships with all sorts of awful consequences and immoral behaviour that totally overrule your life. Thirdly, it's of course to project, to reverse the feelings. If I can make someone else feel like the person who was sold away as mere cargo, then maybe I won't have to feel that way myself. I can project the feeling elsewhere. And again, there are a load of other reasons we could set out for why this kind of thing might happen, but those three feel poignant to the example of Gortash. We are absolutely not doomed to repeat cycles of abuse, but without the right support and care to help you grow, a person can start to feel like they're doomed. And that's when it becomes very tricky. None of which is to excuse Gortash at all, by the way, definitely not, but it's important to understand. The thing that contradicts a lot of what I just said, however, is that it wasn't just some cold, purely transactional decision from his parents. It may have felt like that on one level for Gortash, but I think there's another side to this too. A side we're going to explore in just a moment.
I'd like to propose a pact. I do no harm to you, nor you to me. Furthermore, you'll have
51% off World Anvil! Oh, you better believe it's World Anvil! They are sponsoring this video, they are offering you 51% off, and they are an online tool for building worlds, you may have guessed. But also creating characters, designing and managing campaigns for all sorts of different games. My best friend uses it for D&D, but there's lots of other games. You can use it for planning your stories, writing your stories, working on all sorts of creative projects. For me, it is my novel. I need a tool like this, otherwise I am far too chaotic. We're moving flat soon, and I literally have 6 cardboard boxes full of random sheets of A4 paper I've written old ideas on. Pre-World Anviled me was a nightmare. So with something like this, not only can I keep everything organised, keep it all in one place, be able to easily edit things, but I can create timelines, I can create hyperlinks branching off specific characters or articles or a billion other things that just make it so much easier to find stuff. Planning things can be hard, especially when there's so much to do, but having all of these tools to help visualise it, to help split everything down into specific points, articles one at a time, it helps immensely. I'm not going to show you because it's a secret, but I've created different bio pages for all of the characters in my world, even the minor ones, which house they live in, what their job is, who they're friends with, who they hate, what different beliefs they have or opinions about events that go on in a book or whatever. So, World Anvil is great. I hope you can hear my passion, and if you desire, if you crave. If you call to the heavens for a 51% discount, then use the code TREE, or click the link in the description, or the pinned comment, or if you just want to try out the free version, then go for that. You know, there's no time limit on it. Test it out for as long as you want. World Anvil. His mother has a lot to say about her son if you speak to her.
He was a smart boy. Too smart. He was always a little monster. Nasty to the core. Seen what he's like, same now as when he was a boy. Hateful little wretch. If you were me, you'd have sent him away too, believe you me.
And obviously she is speaking out of defensiveness here about the fact she sold her son away, so this might not be an entirely accurate picture, but now we can see why they had no interest to trace their son, to know the name of this warlock. They didn't just want gold. They actively wanted Gortash gone. Or at least his mother did. We don't ever get to hear the dad's thoughts, which is a shame, but she describes him like he was an evil monster. Why? There's no clear descriptions of Gortash doing anything wrong as a child, no events she mentions, and if she's trying to justify her decision to sell him away, you'd think she'd want to mention as much as possible here. Anything bad he did, or anything she found disturbing or evil or whatever. Not that it would necessarily change my opinion, but it does say something in itself when the only evidence she does give for why she is justified to send him away is that her son whines a lot.
He would have torn me and Truffaut apart with his whining, his demands, the never-ending racket of him.
And you think, he's a kid. That's what kids do. They don't know how to regulate themselves. They don't fully understand the world around them. Fear can feel all-consuming. The pain a baby might feel might not have the rationality yet to understand what it is or how to stop it or to envision beyond it. It's all a world of uncertainty that you rely on caregivers to relieve you from. Of course, a baby or an infant or a child cries and complains and struggles. Why does that make them evil? Monstrous? Unfortunately, this can be all too common a mindset, and to speak about it in a general sense, we do have to simplify it down, but think about it like this. The baby cries because it's in need. Not necessarily just at the baby age, but let's roll with that anyway. It's a distressing noise to hear. Nobody likes the sound of a baby crying. It's kind of designed to provoke a response because that's what the baby needs. It feels distressed. It needs you to feel its distress. It wants you to understand and provide comfort. But it is such a distressing noise, and it can be incredibly overwhelming. Any parent you speak to will likely have some kind of story about how exhausting or difficult it was when their baby just wouldn't stop crying, and they struggled to figure out what was wrong or how to soothe it, and it was just going on, and it kept waking them up crying in the nights over and over. It made them feel helpless and useless as parents and at their wits' end with this child. And crucially, this is the key feeling itself you want to try and contain as a parent, that feeling of total helplessness and being at a loss in the face of some overwhelming emotion that you don't understand. That itself is kind of what the baby might be feeling, and the better you you can manage that feeling itself, tolerate the strain of that feeling, contain it, the better an experience you give of the baby for how to contain it, and then the better they might be able to learn to do that themselves. Not at all easy though. Now, factor in already being at your wits' end from the stress of poverty, say. The Flims are both tradesmen, so they're not at the bottom of the social barrel in Baldurs Gate, but their business is clearly not going well. They seem to be on the brink. And then say there's no other real support to help you in this. Or maybe you've got your own unresolved trauma that makes the stress even more overwhelming, heightens your feelings of helplessness even more. It can become all too easy to feel resentment towards the child. You were on the brink before this baby was born, but at least things felt straightforward then. Now suddenly there's this screaming, crying thing that it's your total responsibility to care for, only you don't quite know how to, and if you don't do a good job, that brands you a terrible mother and a terrible person. That kind of feeling is very, very difficult. And even recognising those moments where you do feel a flicker of resentment, or even rage towards this child that you're supposed to love, the guilt of feeling that at all can make it actually worse, because now you start trying to bottle up and suppress the resentment rather than working to ease the feeling, tying yourself in even more stress out of this guilt, and now you're just not properly bonding with the child. People often talk about postnatal depression, but rarely about postnatal resentment or rage. And ideally, what you have is support to help you manage these kind of feelings, to give you room or an emotional outlet to step away at times, maybe vent a little bit about how difficult it is, maybe even be able to admit yourself that you do feel flickers of resentment at times. Venting in a safe space to recover emotionally so that you can then realise again, actually, you don't resent the baby at all, really. That was just you feeling overwhelmed in the moment. You love this child. Communal support can be really, really important for new parents, be that grandparents who can help out at times, or neighbours, support groups, parenting classes, therapists. I think modern culture tends to tell us we're supposed to manage the burdens of everything on our own, but that's just not always healthy and not setting yourself up the best. If you're not afforded any of that support, it might still go fine, but I'm not about to argue Dravo and Sally Flim were perfectly good and healthy people before their son was born. This isn't about excusing them, again, it's about understanding how things can escalate, and I think this is probably a factor. If you're not afforded support, if you're burdened with too much stress and then the feelings of shame about how you're failing to comfort this child, perhaps older internalised shame, or feelings of self-hatred you might already have, that can come to the surface and could lead you to conclude, my baby hates me. And that's the big fear, right? The one thing any parent worries in the build-up of pregnancy. What if the baby hates me? It stabs hard into your insecurities. And if you start to actually believe that is true, perhaps now you start justifying your own resentment towards it, and say maybe it's okay I felt flickers of resentment because this child hates me anyway, he's vile. Maybe you go a step further, you call him evil, a monster, you paint yourself as an innocent victim at the mercy of this unrelenting, screaming devil child. He's ruined my life, always complaining, never grateful, he only cries to punish me, he's trying to torment me. A vulnerable, totally helpless child just needing care ends up being warped into the image of someone sinister and manipulative and vindictive. So we have simplified quite a bit there, but it's still quite heavy and emotionally affecting to explain. So I hope I haven't gone too far there for some of you, but it's good to understand the kind of dynamics that can occur. And it's again not to say the parents here are blameless, that it's all just a product of their environment. That's obviously not what I'm saying, but it can be an important factor. It's a big part of why children's therapists increasingly work not just with the child, but also with the parents to some extent to help them better contain and manage some of these stresses. Also why therapy, whilst it definitely makes a big difference, and I'm obviously a strong believer in that, it isn't a total solution. Governments can't just start expecting therapists to work like a plaster that you can stick over an entire systemic issue. If you want new generations to thrive, you have to invest in public services and local communities so that parents can be at their best and children can develop the most. How does this all relate back to young Enver then? Well, it tells us this wasn't an abrupt shift in his parents to sell him. some unexpectedly cold act. He likely felt their resentment long before it happened, and so what do you make of that as a child? Being sold away, you're told because they needed the money and that it was best for him. Whether she means best for him because she's arguing it was a good opportunity for Gortash, or because they would have starved if he'd stayed, or more darkly, if they didn't get rid of him, she feared she might end up killing him one day. Not just that though, not that they just needed the money or it was apparently best for him, but because he was a monster and evil and always complaining. I think in that situation, you'd come away with the idea, well, maybe I am evil. They sold me to a literal devil. If they did that, these people who are supposed to love me, I must have deserved it. Maybe they were right. And that's not true, but Gortash might have felt it. And if you're then stuck in a place that sucks away all your hope to believe anything different, I am evil, there's no redemption, there's no being good, it then becomes easy to understand why he might idealise tyranny, and why he might turn to Bane, the god of tyranny. To flip the script, to go, yes, I am a monster, that can be my power though, I'm going to utilise it. Secondly, his great sin was crying. Being in need, being helpless, that's why they got rid of him. So what might this child want to do growing up? Well, maybe just never cry ever again. Never show vulnerability. See vulnerability as a weakness to suppress. This is effectively bland speculation right now that joins up the few dots we do know, because there's so little information we are given by the story. However, at some point, out comes a man with an impenetrable mask of charisma. You never really feel like you get to see Gortash in this game, even when he's speaking with total honesty. You're still wondering who he is underneath. There are faint moments of mockery that hint at an underlying vindictiveness, but we never truly see anything he doesn't want us to. Even in the moment before you kill him, he's still imploring you to see reason with a level of composure.
You ought to reconsider. Divided, the Elder Brain will create an illithid army.
Until it isn't.
No, you have to stop her. Do it, now!
And we can say, well, charming people is just one way to make sure you never get sold off again. Making sure they like you too much to do that and making sure you're the one using them. Or we could say Gortash might have developed what's known as a false self, where after years of emotional expression and development being suppressed, or treated as a bad thing, it starts to feel like he doesn't know who he is anymore, where this mask of charisma is his identity because he struggles to know any further. Any kid has feelings they need to express, and the more you do, the more it helps you to start to form a better understanding of yourself and to explore what you're feeling and how you express it. But if other people silence your expression or they react with rage to whatever you express, it might put you off that. So what you might do instead is start looking and learning, well, what can get a more positive reaction out of my parents or my caregivers or whoever? What can I express that will cause them to respond kindly? Or if that's not possible, at least not rage at me. What kind of behaviour can I adopt that will keep me safe? And then you get someone who's much more focused on analysing other people's expressions and body language and almost manufacturing ways of responding, which all of us do to an extent at times, but to a much greater degree, and when this is happening from an early age, it becomes very hard to recognise what your authentic expression is anymore. You never learn how to explore it. Instead, you just have an image that's been created to keep you safe in interactions. A smoky-haired, well-composed image dressed in an elaborate coat. And now, we don't know for certain that this is the kind of development taking place for him with his parents, but we could potentially link it to his time in the House of Hope. We don't actually know what age Gortash was sold to Raphael. I think all the comments from his mum about him whining probably suggest he was still a child, but we don't know for certain. Other things we don't know: why Raphael wanted him. Was there a reason at all? Was it just one random soul he sought an opportunity to collect? Was there something about Gortash that Raphael thought might be useful? We know Raphael takes an interest in the character Moll in the game, who was at least somewhat similar to what a young Enver might have been like in the sense of cunning and charismatic, but there might be nothing more to it. We don't even know if a young Enver was so charismatic at that age. I would hazard a guess he was probably showing traits of it, that his parents' complaints about him always whining might also reflect a child who was quick-witted and that they didn't like that, someone who had a response to everything, that kind of kid, but never mind that for now. Something we definitely don't know is what Gortash did when he lived in Raphael's lair named the House of Hope. We have no idea at all, beyond one of his servants, Nubaldin, stating that he used to beat Gortash, and he again describes Gortash in ways which potentially build on his mother's description of whining and complaining. Nubaldin calls him a miserable little blot of a boy, snivelling, and a whimpering little face.
We had one house guest by the name of Gortash. A mischievous little blot of a boy. The snivelling little shit. I used to bruise my knuckles on his whimpering little face.
This is a man who would regularly beat him mercilessly, so I think most, if not all, people could be described as having a whimpering face in that scenario, but it's still potentially some indication of the person Gortash was or was seen as, both mischievous but also snivelling. And don't get me wrong there, I don't like the word snivelling. I'm not saying it as a judgment of him. I don't think it's a fair word at all for just to use for someone who's being traumatised here, but it's the words Nubaldin used, and so possibly reflects the way Gortash grew to see himself as well. If this was how people talked about him, maybe that's how he started to think about himself. And he is helpless here. He is enslaved. He is treated like he is weak and pathetic and snivelling, and that his only escape from this judgment is through his mischievous, cunning, charismatic side. A mask to hide what is seen by Nubaldin as snivelling, arguably even a rebellion against it. I mean, it's hard to be clear because we're drawing on like one sentence to try and pick out what people thought of Gortash, but one other interpretation could be that what Nubaldin saw as mischievous might be someone cunning and witty who can talk his way out of a lot of situations and poke holes in your demands. Things that could all be seen as positive traits in a different light, but to a very bitter old man who is also trapped in the House of Hope, wanting to vent his rage and project onto someone else, Nubaldin might not like that. He might want every excuse to hurt Gortash as much as possible, and if this child is, let's say, able to use his cunning to get out of that on certain occasions by appealing to Raphael or to others, or just clever trickery to escape a scenario, Nubaldin would probably regard that as both mischievous and snivelling. Maybe, we don't know. What we do know is this: Gortash authentically expressing himself in the House of Hope would not serve him well at all. If he wasn't already suppressing a lot of that in place of trying to learn what expression earns me the most reprieve, then surely he would start doing that now, which is very sensible in that situation. It's an important defense. I think in the House of Hope your brain would be hardwired to focus always on your survival. What do I need to do to stay safe? And a constant focus just on that, being in that sort of red alert state, can be hugely damaging for your overall emotional development, but a child is hardly going to be thinking about that. At least I can live long enough to hopefully escape, at least I can prevent some of the worst torment while I'm here. And let's not forget, he is now living in the home of someone incredibly cunning and charismatic, and quite literally devilish. Raphael. That's the guy who has all the power and control in the House of Hope. Cunning old Raphael. That power keeps him safe from all harm and anyone he wants to be kept safe. So if Gortash is focused on how best to behave in order to keep himself safe, maybe Gortash would start trying to emulate Raphael. And I doubt he was ever, like, Raphael's protege or anything, but we can probably conclude Gortash was able to learn some things. I think we can maybe infer that from the fact both characters have quite a verbose way of speaking and both draw on similar sorts of analogies.
The mouse smiled brightly. It outfoxed the cat. Then down came the claw. And that, love, was that. A mad dog understands the yank of the leash and the hand of its master, but it cannot be an equal.
And by the way, what also can we make of an approach to social interaction built around the question of how should I behave in order to elicit the best reaction from them? Well, that's a totally transactional approach to relationships. You can easily see how that might warp from what must I do to keep myself safe into what gain can I extract from them? How can I use these people? What is selling someone away to a life of torment if not treating a relationship like a transaction? You can kind of picture how all of this stuff might start to develop in Gortash here, and as much as we know about Gortash's time in the House of Hope, he experienced cruelty and abuse. But we also know this was the time he took the surname Gortash instead of Flim. That surprised me, that Nubaldim knows him as Gortash.
We had one house guest by the name of Gortash.
I can see why you'd rename yourself after you escaped the House of Hope and began your life as an arms dealer, that you might want to cut a new figure, you might want to put the past behind you, pretend it never happened, erase it, so to speak. But if he's renaming himself whilst he's still in the House of Hope, still enslaved from the consequences of what his parents did, that suggests a different motivation, right? My theory, and we will have some slight evidence later on to back this up, is that Gortash's view was that he needed to believe something positive would come out of his time there. Something good must come from all of this horror in the House of Hope. Well, what if my suffering here helps me grow into a better person, a stronger person? Maybe I was weak, maybe that is why I got sold away, but if the only vague hope I can find anywhere in this world right now is in choosing to believe something good might come of this suffering, then I will conclude that the suffering might make me strong. That's a psychological defense, right? It's more comforting than the abject thoughts you were sent here for no clear purpose and that there is nothing good and that this might be endless. That is the depths of total despair, but if this suffering might change you in a good way, turn me from weak Enver Flim, who was weak enough to be enslaved, you might imagine. And Flim is a humble sounding name, a simple name. Turn from that into Enver Gortash, who will learn from this place and who will become strong enough to escape it. I don't know what Gortash means, but it sounds strong. It sounds kind of regal and formidable. It's not inconceivable to believe that Gortash learned in the House of Hope. No amount of compliance or dutifulness or any of that earned him an easier life. It would also be quickly apparent he couldn't fight his way out of here. He's enslaved by a powerful Cambion. I mean, what's he going to do? Fight someone who has 666 health points, who sings their own theme song while killing you? Cunning and deception are his only routes. Things he might learn from Raphael, might emulate from Raphael. Maybe even argue that it's a blessing in disguise to be able to learn from such a devilish devil. And if you conclude that it's a blessing, then you're definitely going to idealise a lot of Raphael's traits. It's in this context his idealisation and worship of Bane might also make sense, a view that the suffering of tyranny toughens up a person. I don't think the new name of Gortash reflects him trying to put the hells behind him. I think it reflects him trying to carve out a positive from his torment. And you know, who can blame him on that point? Again, it's a good defense. And at the very least, if you are stuck here either way, you might as well try and gain something positive from it. This is, in many ways, the healthy thing to do, even if it will run into problems later on that we'll get to. Eventually, Gortash, after waiting with incredible patience for an opportunity, he found one. Nubaldim mentions that he made some kind of mistake, and that's when Gortash goes for it. I don't know any more than that how he escaped the House of Hope, but he did. He returns to Baldurs Gate, free from Raphael and with a new name. Perhaps seeing that new name like a phoenix rising from the ashes, returned from the depths of Inferno as a stronger person. And someone I imagine now completely obscured beneath the mask of his crafted image. That itself was part of what saved him, so why would he let it go? He may have arrived young Enver Flim with just a little bit of cheeky, witty sides to him, but now he has an entire image, potentially a narcissistic shell, depending on how far you want to go with this interpretation, and Enver Gortash lost sight of the person he was beneath that coat. Let's stick with that idea as we discuss Karlach. A lot of what happens next in Gortash's life we know from the playable character, tall, sometimes angry, but otherwise golden retriever Karlach. She was young, she was strong, she was in need of money, and eager to believe in people, I think. Karlach's mother had recently died from illness, and then her father had passed not too long after. Karlach is looking for someone to fill that gap, someone to believe in. And she likes physical work. Becoming a bodyguard for Gortash would be a good job for her, and you can see the appeal, and I don't think she was blind to Gortash. I think there's a very clear idea that he was always a bit of a rogue and she was aware of that, but it's easy to imagine why she would trust him nonetheless. There's also that us against the world mentality. You have your tribe and you just have to stick together if you want to come out right. Gangs often weaponize this kind of mentality to exploit their members, especially people who have lost their family or don't feel at home with their family. Gortash is an arms dealer who's going places. All I've got to do is stick with him and things will turn out alright. Only Gortash suddenly turned around and sold Karlach away to the archdevil Zariel, who took Karlach's heart and replaced it with an infernal engine, before putting her on the front lines of a battlefield and forcing her to kill soldier after soldier for 10 years straight. Again, like with Gortash's parents, he did this for financial gain. Well, not gold, but he got a prototype out of this. Gortash is the man who would later go on to create the Steel Watchers, these weird sort of robot knights that, if you loot them, contain infernal iron. Infernal iron supplied by Zariel in exchange for Karlach. Infernal iron like the infernal iron that has replaced Karlach's heart. Yeah, I think if you join up the dots there, Karlach was effectively transformed into a prototype for a Steel Watcher. In selling his closest ally, Gortash gained both the resources and the knowledge for how to create his army of robots. Although he still obviously needed the Gondians, but that's beside the point there. And I don't actually know if this point is true, but it's something I read in a comment section somewhere, or rather ages ago, that if you allow Karlach to be captured by Gortash when you meet him in game and she is put into prison, if you just leave her there for long enough, when you later go to fight Gortash at the end, he has one more Steel Watcher in the room than he normally does, effectively hinting Karlach has been turned into one. I don't know if that's true, but it's a bloody diabolical idea. So yes, like his parents before, there is an obvious pragmatic gain to selling Karlach. But I again don't think that's the entire picture. I don't think Gortash was someone who never gave a damn about her, did see it as purely transactional. Even if that was definitely one part of his feelings, I think it's much more complicated than that. What are the clues? Well, if you have Karlach in your party and you talk to the character Fitz, you discover she's an old friend of Karlach's and colleague in Gortash's early roguish days, and she mentions that she thinks Karlach was the only thing keeping Gortash a little honest.
I think you were the only thing that kept him a little honest.
So Karlach must have had some influence over him. And even the fact Karlach did trust him as much as she did feel so openly towards him, that suggests there probably was some level of mutual feeling. Not romance, but friendship and affection. And then there's also the character of the Dark Urge, who Gortash definitely seems to have had some close relationship or even romance with. And now let's factor in the proposal Gortash gives you in the game after his coronation. You, the player, have previously killed Ketheric Thorm and taken his piece of Karsus's crown. Your plan is then to hunt down the other two pieces owned by Gortash and Orin and use them to defeat the Elder Brain. You then come to Baldurs Gate, seeing Gortash as a villain for you to defeat, but he sees you and says, well done for killing Ketheric. You've proved yourself formidable, so I'll make you a deal, because the Elder Brain is becoming a threat to all of us, and because Orin is a dangerous liability. If you kill her and you take her bit of the crown, come back to me here and we'll unite it with my piece, and then we will work together to dominate the Elder Brain. And once we've done that, I will share my kingdom with you. We will rule as equals.
I understand congratulations are in order. Thorm's defeat hasn't gone unnoticed. If Orin obtains all 3 Netherstones, she'll plunge the coast into chaos and paint the city in blood. I want to lead this city to glory, not scorch its earth. Thorm's stone is yours to keep. When you slay Orin and take her stone, you bring it here, so the 3 are united once again. What do you say? Shall we be allies?
Astounding Uno reverse on his part, by the way. It's a real good curveball to turn around and congratulate you for killing his ally. But yeah, he makes you this offer, and if you roll an insight check, or if you do take him up on this offer, you quickly discover he is being absolutely genuine about this. It's not a trick. He fully intends to share his power as complete equals with you. He's not lying with the intention of backstabbing you later. He means it. Is that not fascinating? This clearly isn't a guy who's out solely for himself, who wants total control and treats all others as disposable pawns. That's the impression you first have of Gortash, but it's not quite true all of a sudden. In fact, how readily he makes you this offer, a very genuine offer. And if you play as the Dark Urge or as Karlach, how excited and warm he sounds about the idea of working with you. I'm led to believe that this is what Gortash always wanted, to have someone to share power with, to have an equal, to not be alone. And I don't know, it leaves me wondering if there are some gaps in what we know about Gortash, because it doesn't quite add up. A boy who was treated coldly and sold away by his parents to a place where he was abused, and then, whilst he is definitely manipulating Karlach in his relationship with her, it's not entirely that, and then perhaps even have something of a romance with the Dark Urge, and then wants a total equal alliance with you. I said the experiences and relationships you have at an early age leave an imprint. It leaves me wondering if there was some more positive relationship or attachment to some small extent at some point in his early years. Perhaps his parents weren't initially awful, or did he have grandparents who were positive, or even perhaps was he genuinely Raphael's protege? I mean, maybe. It would add to the sense of why he might take up that new name while still in the House of Hope, and why he might idealise the suffering as something to toughen him up, why he might want to emulate Raphael. It's possible, but it's also mighty tenuous, so I'm just gonna leave that as an open point for you to wonder about in the comments. Either way, we've been presented with what seemed like the stereotype of a political villain who is a total solitary figure, but now that's kind of been subverted a little bit. Gortash is more nuanced than that. He wants a partner in crime. Is Gortash lonely? Let's go a little deeper. Gortash escaped Raphael's House of Hope, and then that was it? Raphael most definitely had the power to capture him again, most definitely knew where he was. He's in Baldurs Gate becoming famous, not even trying to hide himself for fear of being recaptured, and yet Raphael does nothing. That tells us either by virtue of escaping or by some specific method he used to escape, Gortash has legitimately earned his freedom from Raphael. He wasn't given it, he got that himself by virtue of his own strength of character and cunning, and definitely patience. Now, if you choose to take up Gortash on his proposal to join forces, you can go and kill Orin and then come to him with the pieces of the crown called the Neverstones, but Gortash throws another curveball. He surrounds you with his own guards and demands that you hand your 2 pieces to him.
I commend you for putting an end to Orin's madness. Faithful, come forward. Hand me the Netherstones and we will rule as one.
So it seems here like he's backstabbing you, however, not truly, because if you do hand the pieces over, he is disappointed. He judges you weak and submissive for giving in and not fit to be an ally, so then he tries to kill you.
Oh, you surrender your advantage too quickly. Such a weak ally is of no use to me. Roll over and die. Give up your life just as easily as you are ready to give up the stones.
However, if you refuse to hand them over, he is pleased. He says it was a test of your mettle, that if they are to be allies, he needs to be sure of your strength, and then he does genuinely regard you as an ally. Even in the middle of this test, if you use your powers to detect his thoughts, he is thinking this.
I will not tolerate weakness. A strong ally requires a strong will.
So again, Gortash seems to want an ally, someone who is worthy of being his equal. That is more preferable than just killing you and taking the crown all for himself. And what happens if you go into this scene playing as Karlach? Surely there's some more unique dialogue then? Yes. Yes, there is. Firstly, you're given the option of how you can possibly trust him after what he did to you, and he brands that a silly, bitter complaint. He sold you away to the hells, and then he accuses you of complaining, whining. Does that sound familiar? But he also suggests it was for the best, that it made you. Not only the engine in your hearts has literally made you more powerful, but so has enslavement in the hells.
I helped you realize your potential. Look at you now, Karlach. You stand at the precipice of a new era. That thing in your heart has made you more powerful than you had any right to be. You're welcome.
Which is the same basic idea again, right? glorification of suffering and trauma into this idea that it makes you stronger, that it's almost a good thing that you should be thankful for. What does Gortash say if you submit and give him the stones as Karlach?
How like you, Karlach. You give in with the slightest bit of pressure. You're such a disappointment. Again, I've no use for such a weak ally.
Whereas, if you refuse to give him the stones...
Yes, that's the spirit, my dear. Your time in the hells has toughened you up. Made a worthy partner out of you. Not so long ago, you did as you were told. No questions asked.
Toughens you up. To an extent, this is probably simply the moral justification he loosely argues for why he sold Karlach away, but I think he does also partly believe it, because it's the story he tells himself of his own suffering. In fact, a lot of people do this. Glorify trauma as some rite of passage that turns a weak child into a stronger adult. It's how Game of Thrones wrote Sansa's story, and I hate it. Trauma doesn't make you strong. If you come out of it strong, that's your inner strength to grow in spite of the pain, not because of it. You suffered an awful experience that likely had a lot of negative effects on you, but yeah, there is still potential to take that experience and make something positive out of it, to learn something positive. I said it made sense why Gortash would do that in A House of Hope, that it's largely a good thing to do, but that's you, that's your strength. It's not some natural byproduct of a traumatic experience. And even then, it's not going to be so straightforward as simply toughening you up without zero negative consequences anywhere. It's obviously more complex than that. Karlach has been made a more powerful fighter. Would you argue she's better overall than if she'd never been sent to Avernus? This is where the problem occurs, and I must speculate again. I wonder if Gortash has never truly accepted that what happened to him was wrong, that it shouldn't have happened. Because, as odd as it sounds, that kind of idea can actually be incredibly difficult and painful to accept, because doing that would mean having to first believe that you didn't deserve what happened to you, that you weren't a bad person, that you didn't need the punishment. And after everything Gortash has gone through, that would be very difficult to believe. Your whole defense has been the idea that it was important and necessary, you know? Much easier to look at what your parents did and say, well, maybe I did deserve it, maybe I am a monster. And then to look at your time in the hells and say, well, maybe I deserve that too. Punishments to somehow cure me of weakness. Blessed suffering to remold me. Maybe even the god Bane intended this for me, so I might grow into someone more worthy of being his chosen. That's kind of turning trauma into something sacred, which on the one hand spares you the pain from recognizing the reality, but on the other hand also inhibits your chance to really grow, to accept that it was wrong, that you deserved better, that you can be a good person, and also crucially that you're not chained to it, that your trauma doesn't define your entire identity. The problem again when you idealize your own trauma is that you might start to idealize other people's too. Convince yourself that it will be good for Karlach, or maybe good for the world. Partly perhaps in order to prop up the belief in yourself. I think part of Gortash genuinely thinks enslaving Baldurs Gate and Faerun in Bane's tyranny will be good for it. And arguably, all of this stems from his own inability to process the reality of what happens to him. It's interesting how pleased he sounds with Karlach, as though it's proven the point for him. What we're arguably seeing is a stark split between two perspectives. Weak Enver Flim. His parents had no use for such a weak ally. And then strong Enver Gortash, born from the baptism by fire. Weak Karlach, who gives in at the slightest pressure, and strong Karlach, who has been toughened up. Perhaps, then, people are either weak and therefore deserve such tyranny, or if they are strong, then they will rise above it like Gortash did. Which, yeah, Gortash was likely brilliant to escape the House of Hope, but also extraordinarily lucky. No one else has ever escaped. You can't idealize it into some rite of passage. You can't measure the world on a scale of weak or strong. So I theorized that Gortash was genuinely close to Karlach, and part of the reason for that was that he saw her as a formidable ally. That's the thing he wants, the thing he's so desperate to believe you, the player, can be. Someone equal to share with. However, his perception of Karlach likely changed the more she started to trust him, which she likely did because they grew closer. I think Gortash mistook that for submission, for doing what she was told, no questions asked, when from Karlach's perspective, this was loyalty. This was choosing to trust a friend because you want to believe in them, not because you were too weak to question them. That's closeness. She followed his orders because she saw herself as his protector. Either way, it changed Gortash's perception of her, or maybe it was his excuse to change his perception of her in order to justify what he did. If she's no longer seen as formidable, then, as he says, I've no use for such a weak ally. His only use was the advantage of infernal iron, and so he sold her to Zariel. Let's discuss Bane. So, we've hypothesized a worldview here of oppression as necessary for true growth. Either you strengthen under pressure to the point you can climb out of it, or if you're never able to, then you must just be too weak to do so, and therefore that you deserve the oppression. Taking his entire experience as a child and needing to stamp it onto the entire world rather than face up to the reality and process it. Projection, at least in one sense, is a bit of a prison that way. Finding yourself compelled to repeat your experiences over and over upon more and more people until what? Are you the tyrant, Gortash, or are you the slave now? The thing is, we get a diary extract from him that I might as well read in full. What is progress? Progress is the movement of society and culture towards a state of collective unity. Without unity, mortals, each with their own individual agenda, blunder against each other, causing friction, conflict, war. Unity, peace and prosperity, is achieved when the collective follows a single agenda, that of one superior person. Runaway egocentrism, that urge often miscalled free will, is the one true enemy of unity. Free will must be eliminated. Control of the brain is the key. The Neverese tadpole is the perfect tool. Tadpoled, the brain is freed of egocentrism to follow the agenda of unity. The tadpole brain is a happy brain. There is no conflict except against the enemies of unity. And the brain is all you need. Once freed from its agendas of free will, it can also be freed from the frailties of the mortal form. The brain can live forever in a steel body, or even better, control that body from afar. This is progress. This is the ultimate state. I mean, that largely explains itself. I think in a way this is almost Thomas Hobbes' philosophy taken to a total extreme. Of course, he then chooses an elder brain to enact his plan of tyranny. They are a giant floating metaphor for removing free will. Of course, he then also seeks to ally with the chosen of Baal and Merkel, because if there are people too formidable to remove their free will, or people that he can see of the superior level, then you must ally with them. They must become of one mind and one aim. Otherwise, a total collective will be impossible. It's then likely he would have been genuinely happy to work alongside both Orin and Keferic for good had they proven to be what he considers formidable allies. Instead, Gortash sees them as flawed. He describes Keferic as blinded by his obsession with his daughter and Orin as a reckless, mad dog liability. On the one hand, oppression is some idealised pressure cooker to make the weak strong, and on the other now, oppression is total unity. The Illithid's grand design is not horror to Gortash, it is peaceful, it is perfect. Provided he also includes the caveat that he isn't the one being oppressed. That this oppression is good for everyone else, just not me, I'm above it. And it's hard to perfectly link this philosophy of total unity to the rest of his beliefs. It's hard to pinpoint where it came from. It's rarely so straightforward as that anyway. I think the suggestion I've offered there is a bit simple. But we can see shades of similarity between this belief and everything else we've already discussed, and we could even just call it the excuse, the justification, rather than the true reason he wants to oppress the entire world. You know, the whole thing about this idea of unity is the exact thing I said about Victor in my videos on Season 2 of Arcane, that it just doesn't make sense. This isn't unity, this isn't harmony. Those things both rely on two or multiple different things coming together to make something better, but what he's doing is removing the difference. This is an absence of the very things that make unity. It depends on difference. It depends on, you know, different melodies and different sounds and colours all being thrown into the mix together to create something more beautiful. If it's just one flat colour of white, that's not really unity, it's just the absence of difference. But the true reason, really, if we strip things back down again, is A, to project his weakness onto others, and B, to try and prop up the belief that his own suffering was good for him, as a means to defend himself against it. And ultimately saying, I am strong. That's kinda what all of this is, and it's really tragic if you think of it in that light. Wreaking untold suffering across the world, all to avoid ever having to glance at the abyss of despair he feels somewhere deep inside. What happens if he enacts his plan of total unity? Do you really believe Gortash would be happy then? We could also obviously somewhat link his philosophy of unity to why he so eagerly wants a partner, but I think I have a different point to make there, actually. Now, I've never played the game as the Dark Urge, so my knowledge is a bit limited here. It's going to be a fairly small section, in which we state Gortash met the Dark Urge, who quickly became a formidable ally and an important factor in building their plans. I wondered if Gortash had once been close to someone else before this, not necessarily romantically, but someone with whom he felt equal. If so, that might explain how he and the Dark Urge became so close so easily. If not, then perhaps this itself was a formative experience in his life. Discovering for the first time someone he saw neither as an oppressor to be stuck at the feet of, nor project his inner feelings of weakness onto. Someone truly equal and admirable. Perhaps the Dark Urge changed him. At the very least though, this was someone else Gortash could scheme with and help take his plan to the next level, and I bet that whole experience was exhilarating. Unity in that sense is a beautiful thing. It is wonderful to have those moments where you do just feel like fully connected with someone else's ideas that are sparking between you, and you're energized and you feel in sync and you're creating something wonderful together. You're taking a little bit of an idea you had and together you just run with it and go so much further. I used to feel that a lot as a kid working on different creative ideas with my friends. That's true unity and harmony. That's two different things, or more different things, coming together to make something beautiful between them. Except in this case, it's two men making a plan to ruin the world. At the very least, though, it was exhilarating teamwork. At the most, there was a genuine romantic feeling between them. A lot of people seem to believe that, have that theory, and I think this would be much more interesting an interpretation of the story if they were genuinely romantic. But I've not played the Dark Urge, I've only seen a few clips, so it's hard for me to judge. What we do know is the Dark Urge seemingly dies, as far as Gortash is aware. Orin kills him, and now he has to work with Orin as an ally instead, and he doesn't like it. I don't think he ever considers Orin as an equal. I think he forces her into oaths that will prevent her from attacking him because there's no real trust. He does see it as this liability. He actively recoils from her in moments.
Control yourself, Orin.
I would suspect more than just the image of a liability that he feels genuinely hurt by what Orin did. I suspect half of his eagerness to work with you, the player, and to get you to kill Orin, whether you're playing as the Dark Urge or Karlach or someone entirely of your own creation, that this would fill a void for Gortash. He misses the Dark Urge. He grieves the loss of his partner. He wants someone else to replicate something similar with. I think that's probably true. I think it's interesting if you look at this story again from the lens that Gortash is in grieving right now and having to hide it. But I also think this. I think he wants an equal partner, a formidable ally, for the sake of projection. I said at the start of this video, Gortash is not a particularly difficult boss fight. I mean, you could choose to fight him early on when you're a lower level and he has all of his Steel Watchers around him, but I prefer following up more of the quest lines, because there's this whole quest where you break into the factory where he makes the Steel Watchers. You discover the Gondian workers who are forced to make these monstrosities because their relatives are held captive in an underwater prison. So, as a result, you can go and save the captives from this prison, which is a quest a lot of people seem to hate, but I find it really fun. I think it's a nice change from the usual combat. Once you've saved them all, the Gondians help you destroy the central control panel, shutting down all of the Steel Watchers. As a result, Gortash is much more vulnerable. It's just him, a couple of his Bane minions, and then some weird other tech he has. He gets this weird puffed up armor transformation in the middle of his fight, and he gets a shield, and he gets some giant hands, and then there's all these cannons and traps he has on the wall. This all tells us, I think, the same thing his very thick, extravagant coat tells us. This guy who put up propaganda images all around town to convince people he's a young and handsome man. A guy who dresses like an anime cosplay. Gortash doesn't feel strong within himself. Gortash wants to feel strong. This same point we keep coming back to over and over this video. And actually, thinking this now to derail from my planned notes, if we go back to that whole progress document he wrote, the brain is all you need. Once freed from its agendas of free will, it can also be freed from the frailties of the mortal form. The brain can live forever in a steel body. Suddenly, you look at these steel watchers and you think there's a part of that is what Gortash idealizes, you know? That's in a way kind of what he wants to be like, this strong steel body. What would a formidable ally mean to him in that lens then? Someone to literally strengthen his force, yes. Someone else to surround himself with alongside this mass of steel watchers. But on the one hand, you'd think he'd be concerned, wouldn't you? You'd think he'd see you as a threat to his power. That he'd be uncomfortable sharing power with someone who does outwardly look so strong. You, the player who have just gone about killing Kefteric Form and Orin all on your own. My theory is he wants a formidable ally as a projection for how he wants to see himself. To look upon you like it's a mirror. If I am an equal ally with this tough looking fighter, then I must be tough too. I think he wants an equal ally in order to validate all of this. And that's probably what felt so especially good about his relationship with the Dark Urge. The idea that someone who was so formidable would also value him, would want to work with him, see him as an equal. If you do take this line of thought to be true, then it's not too much of a stretch to imagine a younger Gortash fantasizing about being Raphael's equal, or hoping Karlach can prove herself to be as formidable ally that he wants. It's not then truly about wanting unity, it's about validation. You are how he wants to see himself, and then he needs you in order to fuel that image. But would it last? This proposed alliance of equals he makes with you, or had made with the Dark Urge, he might genuinely mean that, and genuinely intends to keep his word, but I reckon his feelings would at some point change nonetheless. All it would take is the tiniest flicker of something that would puncture his idealized view of a formidable ally, and then that's it. Then you no longer live up to his perfect image. You're no longer the flawless ally who validates his own strength. Suddenly he again has no use for such a weak ally. If we can look at that diary extract and at this invention of the Steel Watchers and think that they, to some metaphoric extent, symbolise both how he wants to see himself, but also how he is inside as well. Someone who wants to appear heavily armoured and tough, and yet feels totally empty within. These are effectively empty suits here. Wonderful expression for his feelings. And the thing is, you, the player, can't symbolise that for him. You won't speak to his feelings of inner emptiness the way you would if you became a similar shell to these, a pawn to control, to sell off. And if you never become that, if you're his equal, if you just symbolise what he hopes to be, then at some point you likely will be rendered a threat, because he'll want to internalise what you represent to him and hope that in defeating you, he'll be able to do that, even though he won't. And more so, you are not two people of one mind after all. No two people are of one mind. They can share certain ideas and be totally connected in certain moments and experiences, but all people are different, and that's the beauty of connection, but also the struggle of conflict. What can make relationships so difficult? And I look at Gortash's approach towards relationships, and I do see him in conflict about them. Someone who does genuinely want another, an equal, someone to share with, perhaps the kind of friend he might have been wanting his entire life. Someone to help him find a more healthy attachment, but that largely positive desire sets against this other overwhelming impulse for validation and power and control that would potentially sabotage all of it. I think he would betray you. There's a good chance he would have betrayed the Dark Urge at some point, and then he would end up alone. The very thing he didn't want. You know, I always feel a bit heavy when I get to the end of this kind of video because it is sad. The idea that any of this occurred is incredibly tragic, and I just think it hurts to remember how much one person's pain when they're given power can lead to so much destruction on a wider scale. I think about that a lot, considering the modern world. Gortash is a story of what can happen at its absolute worst, but again, not all who suffer are doomed to repeat it or enact it, and we can heal. Therapy, from a scientific point of view, is getting better and better at understanding how best to help people heal, and not even just through therapy. In general, I mean. A lot of you tell me making videos like this even helps you out a lot, that these exercises in empathy, especially if it's a character you might relate to. I think Gortash is a great character in Baldurs Gate 3. I love how he does somewhat subvert the norm for a villain. I actually enjoy how easy his boss fight can become. I think there's enough other challenging boss fights, and I just like the idea of that. I love all of this build-up in the game, especially if you're playing with Karlach in your party. All of this build up to killing and fighting and getting revenge on Gortash, and then when you get to him, it all happens quickly and easily, and leaves Karlach with a new kind of hole in her heart. It never quite brought the fulfillment she hoped for. Healing isn't quite as simple as that. One question I'm going to leave you with though, because my brain is too fried to make any sense of this now. I explained that in the game you can go and visit Gortash's parents. However, they're not exactly his parents anymore. If you talk to them, they seem spaced out and they just totally praise their son for everything. But if you use your powers to read Sally's mind, you discover that there is a real Sally still inside her somewhere. She's just been trapped. That Gortash previously visited his parents, puts a tadpole into their brains, and is mind controlling them to speak nothing but praise.
Help me! Dear gods, help me!
And if you ask her why Gortash did this...
He said he wanted to make us powerless. Still bitter after all these years.
There is that basic idea again, the idea of projecting the weakness onto others. Why he would go back to his parents makes sense to me. Why he would turn them into walking propaganda to support his political claim also makes sense to me. The bit I don't get though is that when you go upstairs you find a chest that I assume must have been Gortash's, and there's a scrapbook in there that records his correspondence with the Dark Urge. And that's what confuses me. Does it suggest Gortash was living here at the time he was corresponding with the Dark Urge? That after he escaped Raphael and became an arms dealer, built his influence, then at some point starts formulating a plan and meets the Dark Urge to help with that plan. Are we meant to believe all of that happened while he was living with his parents again? Because that would really surprise me. I assumed after he left Raphael he found his own place to live and only popped back to visit his parents on the one occasion to give them a tadpole. That's also what Sally seems to suggest.
Enver's ruined my mind, he's taken my body. I should have slammed the door in his face.
And he didn't surely have the tadpoles in his possession right after he left Raphael. There must have been a long gap of years there, possibly a decade, possibly more. So why would his scrapbook be here? Maybe there's an interesting answer there. Maybe it's literally that's just where they put it so you can learn the lore. Yes. Comment your thoughts. Comment your thoughts in general about this video. Goods or bads or in between. Like this video if you liked it, if you want more analysis on Baldurs Gate characters as well. And subscribe for all my other videos. I've done loads of analysis videos on other characters from other things. I've done loads of videos in general. I'm a bit eclectic with what I do. But yeah, maybe even buy me a coffee or support me on Patreon. Otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Luke Core, Michael Gallagher, Benry, Thafi, Chad Bramwell, and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.